Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Meet Me at the Spot. I'm your host, Holly, and this week I am so excited to share my conversation with Chuck Copenspire. Chuck uses they them pronouns as a queer coach, creative technologist, and community builder devoted to helping weird, wonderful people do work that matters. With a background in digital strategy, slam poetry, and spiritual support, Chuck blends systems thinking with deep empathy to help others move through shame, get unstuck, and reconnect with their purpose. They are the founder of Identity Pending, host joyful skill sharing workshops, and believe that business can be a healing, liberatory force. When they're not coaching or creating, you'll find them singing in a musical, gardening, or scheming up ways to build resilient, inclusive communities. So I'm so excited. This conversation went in so many different directions, but it was so wonderful and beautiful to learn from Chuck and all of the things that they do. So let's go ahead and jump into my conversation with Chuck. Welcome, Chuck, to the podcast. I am so delighted to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So, for the listeners, because I know a little bit about you from following you on social media, but for the listeners, tell us who you are, what you're all about, just a little bit about you.
Yeah. Well, I do a lot of things, but I would say broadly, I'm an author, a speaker. I do coaching on all kinds of stuff from coming out as trans, polyamory, how to design your website if you're a sex positive content creator and you don't want to get deplatformed. I basically am just a professional problem solver and uh, I have an overactive brain, so I write a lot of stuff down, I guess is a good way to sum it up. Yeah, I love having honest conversations, and I really think adult sex education is important, and I think empowering sex positive creators is extremely important because we should be getting our information from peers and experts and not other sources that might not be giving us the best information.
Yes, as a sex educator, thank you for that. So I always like to kind of start off by asking what really got you into the work that you do? What inspired you?
I would say a big motivator for me is I like to always pay it backwards. So I like to think, what are the problems I had 3 months ago, 3 years ago, and what are the solutions that I developed to survive that? And how can I use that knowledge to help somebody who might be where I was 3 years ago or 3 months ago? And I think because storytelling is such a big part of my brand, that's why people come to me for so many different things. Because I've lived through a lot. I've been in a cult. I accidentally destroyed it by asking too many questions. I've had 2 kids as a trans guy. I've lived, laughed, and loved like as much as you can.
Yeah, I love that. I have never heard somebody use that term. Like that's really great. A cult. I have
Yeah.
so many questions, friend.
I haven't got to do a podcast about this yet, so you can ask me anything.
Okay, spill the tea. Like what? Okay.
Well, I'm not going to name names because the
No.
cult leader's still alive and he's very litigious. But when he passes away, I will be writing a book about it, and maybe there'll be a Netflix special. Hopefully, cross fingers. But basically, I was living on the road, learning about foraging, just kind of bopping around. And I ended up at a festival, and the festival was at this permaculture research farm. And I'm really into permaculture. And it turns out they were looking for interns. And I was like, great, I would love to be an intern. I have all these ideas about permaculture research. And they were like, wow, wonderful. And they were like, by the way, we're polyamorous. And I was like, that's cool. I'm cool with polyamory. I've been polyamorous for 10 years. And so I moved onto this farm. I get into the research. I'm learning how to do chicken raising, processing animals for meat. I'm growing food. I'm digging out greenhouses out of the hills. I'm having a great time. But there's this subtle undertone of there's something going on between the people who've been there for a while. There's a lot of tension. People are trying to control who talks to me and what they talk to me about. And then at some point, the leader of the cult sort of spills the beans that he basically, and again, I'm being vague intentionally. Effectively, they were trafficking people in order to make money for the cult. He was trafficking people, and he was basically gaslighting and brainwashing 19-year-olds who wanted to come and learn to farm and then using them for whatever nefarious purposes he wanted, but he wasn't expecting a 27-year-old consent educator pro dom who used to work with victims of trafficking and was aware of what grooming was to show up on his doorstep as a delightful little twink. And, I think I was very unassuming and he was used to taking advantage of people who were, positive, extroverted. But I had enough lived experience to see what was going on. asked enough questions, and then everyone realized we were in a really bad situation and we all left. And it was really sad. And I wrote some angry folk songs about it. But yeah, it sucked and it was beautiful. And I still love a lot of the people that I left that cult with because we all had the same values. We were all there for the same reasons. So we're still in touch. But yeah, there was like I said, there'll be a whole book about the details.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, breaking news.
I feel like Netflix will be like, hey, we need to interview you for part of this documentary we're doing. I'm like, okay, sure.
I don't know if you have the fantasy of being that person, in the documentary, with like a cool three-quarters lighting with your name underneath. It's like, I just see it. I'm gonna do it.
I love it. I love that. Wow. Wow. I think a lot of times people talk about cults, but they talk about like cults, right?
Mhm.
Um, and not actually referring to an actual cult. When you said that, I was like, wait, what? A cult? I need to know more. I'm sorry, I'm so nosy.
No, please. I
That's
mean,
why I have a podcast and I interview people because I get to be nosy as part of my job. Wow, that's fascinating how predatory. Especially people who are like, this is an interest of mine, this is a passion of mine. Polyamory. I'm polyamorous. Cool, even better. Look at all these parts of my identity and my interests all coming together into one cute little place. And then it, gets to a point where you're like, how did I get here?
something seems really wrong here. And it doesn't seem like anybody else feels like this is really wrong.
Yeah, right. I think a lot of times people have this misconception that like, how dumb do you have to be to like fall for a cult? And it's like
Mm.
it's not about that at all. It really isn't. Because
Hmm.
I will tell you, as somebody who did multi-level marketing, which I knew I was going in, I knew what it was going into it. I was not like, I'm gonna be a boss babe. I wasn't, but it's so easy to get hooked into it. Then you get so into it, it's like, how the hell do I get out of this? Very smart, intelligent people are looking for connection, are looking for someone else who shares their interests and all of that, and then get into it, and then those red flags start going off. And then I feel like sometimes when they go off, but everyone around you is like, it's great. You're like, wait, am I crazy? Am I reading too much into this? Because of my background, am I looking at this going, I'm doing too much. I'm doing too much. Everything's fine. Everybody else is fine. It's
Hmm.
fine. All right. So I feel like people have a lot of misconceptions about people who become victims of cults. I want to kind of call it what it is.
Yeah, well, and I think a big factor of it too is we were really isolated. We were about an hour from town. Everyone else who had been there for 10 years or more. And anytime that you tried to introduce a thought of any dissent, he had like a thing about like, well, you should really get therapy to investigate why you're so judgmental. Like he would really try to undermine any doubts that you had. And everybody there was like, well, our trust in ourselves has been undermined for 10 years, so that's normal for us. They have those I forget what the phrases are, but cults will often have these like shutdown phrases. And he had probably a whole book of them. He had one for every single independent thought you could come up with. And it turns out, I would say the benefit of being a neurodivergent person who has carved out a space for myself to trust myself. I think a lot of neurodivergent people have really strong instincts for lies and injustice. And that, I would say that experience taught me more than anything that my own compass does tell me the truth about my own safety and about what is right for me, and trusting that. And even like non-violently, just asking questions. Like that's what broke the cult. I didn't have to do anything violent. I just asked questions no one had ever asked. Because I
Mm,
was curious. I didn't want it to really be a cult. So I was trying to like make sure it wasn't. And then it turns out that it was.
right. Yeah. What I heard you say is neurodivergent people are amazing. As a fellow neurodivergent person,
Hmm.
yeah, we do have this very unique instinct around injustices, around these things. And I think I always tell people, I'm like, that's what I think makes it so difficult because in my experience, I want to say this is a general blanket statement. In my experience, the majority of people who are working in like social justice fields. So for me, that includes teachers, that includes social workers, counselors, all of these folks who work in these fields are a lot of the times neurodivergent. And so they are not only going to work all day long and doing this work, but then they are just living in the world we exist in right now and
Hmm.
feeling all of that. And I mean, it makes it difficult to show up every day. And it also provides this unique superpower. We can kind of see through the BS, right? Like we see through it, like, wait a minute, that's not right. Something,
Right.
my little spidey senses are tingling, right? Like something's not right here. This doesn't add up. And so a lot of times people think like, oh, being neurodivergent is, some sort of negative. And I'm like, I mean, there are some things about it that like really suck.
Comfy. Yeah.
It's uncomfortable. And also, it's my superpower, man. Like,
Hmm.
it's my superpower to be able to feel on a different level than neurotypical people do.
And I feel like once, like now that I've really streamlined, like what are my neurotypical like superpowers? What are the things I'm extremely excellent at? And what are
Mhm.
the things that honestly I just should not even bother doing because
Mhm.
I'm just not good at that thing. And some other person's neurodivergence, they're excellent at that. So why don't I let them do that? I'll do what I'm great at. Has really preserved my energy rather than trying to be like, in quotation marks, normal. These are the things I'm amazing at. And I'm just going to focus on doing those things
Yeah.
and giving myself permission for that to just be okay.
Yeah. That's a hard place to get to. Yeah, I think I'm still working through that because I'm a helper and fixer. And so my brain is like, oh, I can do that. I can figure that out. I'll be able
Hmm.
to do this, right? Like, I think I can do all of the things when in reality, I'm just one person.
Yes, which is hard. It's hard to accept. I would love to be 10 people. I would get so much more done.
Yes, I feel like all of my 10 people though would be all laying in bed under a blanket,
Mhm.
just binge watching a show I've watched 8 million times. We'd
Mhm.
all just be snuggled up together. I'd like to be like, oh yeah, all of my personalities, we would do so much, but we would not. I just have to be honest with myself. So I want to also switch gears about something else you talked about in your intro that I'm always super fascinated about, being a trans person
Mhm.
who is a parent, who is the
Mhm.
birthing parent, and love to know more about your experience there and what sort of misconceptions folks have.
I would say two things that really jump out to me. I promise I'm not trying to plug my books, but
Yeah,
uh,
please do.
I wrote The Trans Guy's Guide to Pregnancy, which is coming out through Microcosm Publishing probably the end of this year, end of 2025. But I go into basically literally all the details about it. But the two reasons I really chose to write that book are there's a ton of misinformation in the trans community about fertility for people with uteruses who might go on testosterone. My second pregnancy, I had been on testosterone for a year and a half and then went off of it for 6 months and had a successful pregnancy and have a very healthy 1 year old now, and I'm back on T. So I would say there is an unfortunate misinformation epidemic in the often transmasculine or non-binary community where they say you have to have your uterus removed for safety reasons. We completely debunk that in the book. It's fact checked by doctors. We talk about where that myth came from. So I really have met so many trans guys who wished that they had known that they could have children because they are sad now that they made permanent medical decisions based on like just prevalent medical misinformation. So the whole point of the book is to try to address that. And then I'd say the other big misconception that I heard a lot, especially while I was pregnant, is a lot of cis women would say, well, being pregnant is the most feminine thing you can do. And I believe that for them, it did make them feel very attached to their femininity. And I love that for them. But for me, honestly, it was inherently kind of a gender neutral experience. If anything, it's like it's hardcore, it's brutal, it's warrior energy, and you can ascribe either gender to that. But for me, it was very like affirming of some of my qualities that I guess feel masculine to me, but could feel anyway to anybody, like the strength it takes, the determination it takes, the sacrifices it takes. For me, it wasn't a feminizing experience. The only part that was awkward and difficult is that they don't really make clothing for masculine or non-binary people that are pregnant. And the place I went for all my care was called the Women's Center because they assume that anyone getting ultrasounds or giving birth is a woman. So it's the Women's Center. And I would say my birthing team got my pronouns right maybe 40% of the time, and they were really trying for the effort. I commend them and I appreciate it. So I recognize that for many like providers in the birth giving space, it's still new, but there are so many of us, and there are going to be so many more of us that I think it's important for care providers to really kind of start to expand their concepts of who might be walking in the door and understand how to serve that population.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you brought all of that up. Thank you. I used to work for a birth control clinic a long time ago, and as a sex educator,
Hmm.
um, and we had an event with a with another local organization, and I was on the panel for this event, and it was family planning, specifically for trans and non-binary folks.
Hmm.
And so on our end, I did not plan this event. I was just asked to be a speaker on the panel. I was told the event was focusing on family planning, so like preventing pregnancy for trans folks who were not wanting to get pregnant. And there is a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and just lack of information for folks.
Hmm.
A lot of people still are like, oh, once you go on T, like that's birth control. I'm like, no,
It's
no,
not.
no, no, friend. So yeah, and then there was someone on the panel, also a trans man who thought that tea was their birth control, and then they got pregnant, and they talked about that experience and brought their little baby with them. And I was like,
Oh.
my baby. Half of the audience was very confused because they thought it was a conversation around being able to get pregnant in trans and non-binary relationships. They were like, wait, why are you telling us like how not to get pregnant? What is happening? So that was fun for not me as the pregnancy prevention person on the panel, but it was really enlightening. And at that time, I did not know a lot about pregnancy and parenting specific to trans and non-binary folks.
Hmm.
And so, I'm someone who likes to be extra prepared because I never want to sound like I don't know what I'm talking about.
Hmm.
Uh, and so I had done a ton of research beforehand and learned so much. And, as I grew in my career, I realized the importance of moving away from like the gendered language. And I get
Hmm.
people all the time that are like, why do you say birthing person? Why do you say person with a uterus or person with a penis? Because that is the simplest way to include everybody
Yeah.
that I'm talking about. If I'm talking about something specific to people with a uterus or people with these specific body parts, right? Then I'm going to use that language because I've gone into classrooms, I've gone into spaces where folks are feel like I'm not talking to them because I'm using very gendered language.
Hmm.
You're a trans person, you're non-binary, or you fall under, the umbrella of whole hosts of identities, right? And you
Hmm.
feel like I'm not talking to you, you're just tuning me out, right? And so the information is important not because of your identity, but because of like the physical body parts that you may have. Information is important. And I love that you have a book coming out and don't ever apologize for promoting your
Hmm.
stuff. That's why I have a podcast.
Thank you.
That's why I have a platform. I'm excited. I think this is really going to be so useful for folks to have this information, especially coming from somebody who has that lived um, experience with it. So I think that's going to be fabulous. I cannot wait.
Yeah, I will say the only part I'm anxious about is I wrote two chapters, an unflinching account of my first birth, an unflinching account of my second birth, and both of those births went sideways. And
Oh,
so I personally, as a person before giving birth, did not know the kinds of things that could happen. And I wasn't emotionally prepared for either of those detours. Both of
mm,
my kids are happy and healthy. I'm recovered. But the first time I almost died, and the second time my son almost died.
oh, wow.
So it's like birth is real, and it's a lot. And I think that the gravity of that deserves to be explored and expressed because I think it can seem like such a casual, cute, fun thing to have a baby, and it's like, mm-mm,
Mm-mm.
no, you're going to be obliterated in every way that you can imagine.
And that's even if nothing goes sideways,
Yeah.
right? I was just talking to another guest and we were having a very in-depth conversation about this. Like my pregnancy, everything went fairly normal. I mean, I was of advanced maternal age.
Ooh.
So, I was considered high risk the entire time just because of my age. But I had, my delivery was uneventful. I had very little tearing. Everything was great. My baby was born on her due date. I'm like she just knows, like she's just right on time. And everything was pretty uneventful. And still that shit was traumatic. Like
Mhm. Mhm.
I I don't ever want to go through that again. We always talked about maybe having two, but After being pregnant during a pandemic, in the height of a pandemic, by the way. My
Hmm.
child's almost 4, so like we had to get COVID tested before I could even as soon
Oh,
as I got admitted, they're like, we're gonna have to COVID test you. And I'm like, great,
ugh.
awesome. Thankfully it was during a time when my spouse was allowed in, and I was able to have a doula. And
Mm,
thank goodness, because that was helpful, because you're right, nobody talks about the wildness that is pregnancy. They're just like, you'll
mhm.
just know. You'll
Yeah.
just figure this out. And then when I didn't, I was like, I am a terrible parent. I'm a terrible mother. Who let me have a child? Why did they let me leave the hospital? Like, it was so wild. And they're like, oh, well, you have your 6-week appointment after you give birth, and then you're good to go. I just like, my child's almost 4. I'm still postpartum. Okay. Like, I am still going through it.
Hmm.
And nobody talks about that at all. Uh,
Hmm.
and I love how like some people feel that it's, you know, uh, super feminine. And then some people are like, yeah, not, I mean, sure, I get it that for you, but for me, it actually brought out these parts. I told my spouse that when I was giving birth, I needed them to remind me of what a boss ass bitch I am. And I was pushing, and my spouse was like holding my hand right by my ear, going, you're a boss ass bitch. You are a boss ass bitch. And the entire labor and delivery team going, yeah, you are. You got this. Like, and just cheering me on while Disney music is playing in the background. And it
Beautiful.
was a beautiful moment, magical, so magical. But I just remember, and they were laughing, like, did you just tell her she's a boss ass bitch? And I'm like, yeah, no, that's helpful. I needed to be reminded I can do this. I am going to push this baby out.
So I feel like I have a similar story, which I have not shared publicly, but I find hilarious. So my partner is really into Star Trek. While I was on bed rest for my second pregnancy, I watched all of The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. And so the only thing I remember him saying to me while I was giving birth is the Klingon phrase, kapla, which is something like, it's like some kind of warrior, like rallying cry. And I think he said that right before the final push. It was so nerdy, but in my mind, I was like in this like Klingon chamber with like torches and stuff, and I was in the warrior mindset. And yeah, I just love like that. That just felt like a very like us moment. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, nobody talks about the really hard stuff. And
Hmm.
I think people like to kind of forget about it. I did not. Listen, I still have a journal that I kept on my phone during my pregnancy and for postpartum afterwards. And anytime I have felt that twinge of like, I could do this again. I could do this again. It would be a lot easier this time because I know what I'm doing. I go back to them and be like, no, sweetie,
Mm.
take a breath, take a breath, and take several seats, because no, you didn't love it. Remember, you love it now because you have a 4-year-old who's potty trained, who's doing all of the things by herself for the most part,
Hmm.
and is
Hmm.
fairly independent-ish. Remember, you didn't love sitting there holding a newborn sack of potatoes who you didn't even know if they liked you, or if
Hmm.
you were doing anything right, because they couldn't tell you.
Yeah, or when they don't sleep or when they
Yeah.
can't talk and they just scream. That's where my
Yeah.
1-year-old's at right now. He's just mad at everybody because he doesn't know words yet.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
adorable, but also so much rage.
Yes. But you're like, okay, what are you so angry about? Cookies. You just want some cookies? All right. I mean, like,
Yeah, he calls everything Baba, but he's getting really good at pointing and grabbing, so that's helping.
yes. That's, I'm like, you have to just, what do you want? Just point and grab it. You
Mhm.
can, I got you. I'll hold you up, and everything. So yeah, that is, pregnancy is wild, but they're not going to trick me into having a second kid because the first one was so easy. I'm not going to be bamboozled. So, and also my body's like, girl, no.
Yeah, I'm good. Two's done. I'm closing up shop.
You're going to have to tune in next week for part 2 of my conversation with Chuck, where they're going to give me some advice that I didn't know I needed, but was very fun and very entertaining. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Meet Me at the Spot. I'm your host, Holly, and this week's episode is part 2 of my conversation with Chuck. If you didn't check out last week, go ahead and do that now, and then come back here for part 2. All right, let's switch gears again, because now I have questions about like your consulting and coaching and all of
Mhm.
like the cool stuff that you do. Because like I said, I follow your social media and I like love your posts so much. And I love like what you're doing in that space, because not everybody has the talent and skill set. This kind of is a full circle moment from the beginning, right? Like not everybody just kind of like knows these things. But I want to talk about like kind of what got you into that and if you want to talk a little bit more about the work you do there.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long road for me. I have so many certificates, as many of us do. I started coaching as a health coach, and then I run into this a lot where sometimes I feel like the things I know should just be publicly accessible, so I don't like charging for them. And I was working through my own health issues, so health coaching was really interesting for me for understanding what to eat to feel better. And I still like doing that, but I just kind of just like cooking for people. I don't really health coach at all. And I didn't feel like the program I took was great. They didn't really teach me how to build a business. They didn't really teach me much besides nutrition, which okay. But then I got a like somatic relationship coaching certificate from the Somatica Institute. And I learned about intimacy coaching and consent coaching and teaching people to feel what they're actually feeling and how to move through it and how to understand those signals. And that was interesting. During the pandemic, I started coaching people around that. And mostly I was coaching people who were new to polyamory and really struggling with various dynamics and self-judgment and stuff like that. And just an army of trans women who needed somebody to come out to and some support for coming out at work, coming out to their partners, exploring, expressing themselves. So they would sit with me and we'd talk about makeup or clothes, and they'd get to kind of show me. They're like, I did my makeup today, and I try to give them little tips. Not that I'm a makeup expert at all, but that was really beautiful and tender, and I loved it. But I previously had a graphic design business and web development business. So, through I've had my resume is ridiculous. I've done so many weird things, but I got back into tech after doing relationship coaching and then got laid off from tech after the economy tanked in 2022. And so then I started building websites and doing graphics again, like I did at the very beginning of my career, like 12 years ago, and found that I was running into sales and marketing advice that made me feel really sick. And I was like, I don't want to close sales like this. I don't like this. And I can't be the only person who's deeply uncomfortable with these like really manipulative sales tactics. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to write a guide to how to do sales and marketing if you don't want to feel slimy. And people really responded to that. And I started to realize there were a lot of neurodivergent, queer, and disabled business owners who honestly just all traditional business and marketing advice was not landing for them, and they were beating themselves up feeling like they were the problem when really, like we were saying before, listening to your instincts about what feels right for you, what's energizing for you. I was losing energy trying to do stuff that didn't align with my values. And when I started doing stuff that aligned with my values, it brought in other people who were really hungry with similar values for these solutions that did not require them to twist themselves into these uncomfortable shapes. And so I think I just sort of accidentally found my niche by just not appreciating the landscape and deciding that I wanted to do something different. And now my books are pretty full, which is nice. I mean, I've taken like 4 or 5 runs at entrepreneurship, and I think this is the first time it's really like I think I found it, you know what I mean? So I want to normalize. You might have to take a couple runs at starting a business before you find the thing that is actually your thing. But yeah, 15 years later into entrepreneurship, I think I did it.
I love that. Oh, um, you know, I always felt that same way about sales. I'm not good. I'm not good at it because it feels icky to
Hmm.
me. You're like, I found that neurodivergent, queer, disabled people. I'm like, check, check, check.
Hmm.
That's why. Because I fit all those boxes.
Yeah,
Yeah, it just always felt like manipulative,
it
um,
is.
predatory. It felt
High pressure.
yeah, and I'm someone who's like very weird about money stuff, and so asking people to spend more money on products that I was selling was like, I don't know how to upsell. I'm really bad at this. And so I wasn't making a lot of money when I was working in multi-level marketing, which
Hmm.
is why I ended up leaving because it just wasn't the fit for me. I thought it would broaden my horizons. Also got told messaging that so I was selling for a very famous multi-level marketing, although they don't use multi-level marketing anymore, apparently, sex toy company. And because of the nature of work that I do, was told that, I would be really valuable in providing input. I never was asked to provide any input whatsoever. And it led to a lot of people being like, yeah, I'm a sex educator. It's like, respectfully, you're not. And I'm not saying you need to have all the letters behind your name and everything, but as someone who like legit has like two master's degrees and over 20, almost 20 years of experience doing this work, I'm going to tell you, you are a salesperson. And
Hmm.
that's good. That's great. Like people should have great sex toys.
Hmm.
Uh, and also, there was a lot that was missing. I think at the height of when it was kind of like at the start of the downslope for me. The company came out with this LGBTQ plus line and really focusing on trans folks, which I was like,
Like that
great,
conceptually.
love that as a concept, and zero education to folks who, were selling on how to properly discuss some of these items. And at that time, I was like, I don't know how to talk to people about Packers. I don't know how to have these conversations, right? Like I don't nobody had there's no like guide. We have guides for every other product and to talk about it, but there's nothing put out. It was like, we're doing the LGBTQ thing.
They're like,
It-
check, we are woke.
yeah, and it was just really kind of disappointing for me
Hmm.
because I felt like this could be so valuable for folks who feel disenfranchised by especially by the sex toy industry, right? And
Hmm.
that there isn't, all this inclusive stuff at a decent quality, right? Quality is important, especially if you're gonna be using sex toys, especially if you're putting things inside parts of your body. And so it just felt really like a huge disappointment and a letdown. And a lot of people who were much higher in the organization than I was, who tried to bring these things up, were kind of silenced. And it was just really disappointing. And then for me, it got to that point where I was like, I don't feel good doing this anymore. I thought this would get me out of my introvert shell and have parties, but turns out I don't like selling and I don't like marketing and I don't know how to market myself because I was under such strict rules about like how you could
Hmm.
and could not. And, I don't have to tell you how the algorithm hates sex education being discussed on
Generally,
all. And that just like wasn't,
except LinkedIn.
stop it.
I have a whole article about this. I'll send it to you. LinkedIn, I know some professional courtesans in Las Vegas who use LinkedIn quite successfully and have not been deplatformed like they might be on some other ones. Also, if you make sex positive content and you put it on YouTube, put it on Pornhub. They have better ad revenue for creators. Nobody's talking about this. Nobody's talking, blah. But really do it.
Listen.
Yeah, even if you're not taking your clothes off, if you're doing sex education and you want to talk honestly about actual anatomy and not be deplatformed, go on Pornhub.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I have so many ideas. So, my brother-in-law has a 3D printer and has made me some very beautiful anatomy models, which I'm actually going to start selling on my website pretty soon. And because he's like, I could make these for other people. I'm like, people would buy these. I work in the space where people want stuff like this for their educational content. So, but anyways, yeah, I never would have thought of that because nobody talks about that. You're right. Because nobody tells you, here's some ways. Oh,
Well, and I think what
yeah.
is weird about me is I'm in both worlds. You know, I've been an online content creator with people. I coach people who are in that space, mostly educators, but also some performers. And that I'm in the normal space. You know, I'm in the non-sexual marketing space. And I think it's really interesting how those two worlds can inform each other because there are really unique solutions that are needed for cannabis-related businesses, alcohol-related businesses, adult or sex education-related businesses. They just have unique challenges because there are so many limitations on what you can do for good reason for some of it. But yeah, you got to get creative. They're really unique spaces.
Yeah. My mind is going a million miles a minute now. I'm like, oh, I have so much to look into this weekend.
Hmm.
Oh, that's fantastic to know though. See, and this is why I have a podcast where I connect with folks like yourself because I learn more hosting a podcast than I ever have in my entire career. Honestly, I've learned so much from the coolest people, yourself included. And I will say, season three, I've said this in a bunch of different episodes, but season three is the season of trans men. I have had, you will be number four.
Ooh.
I know this is a fabulous season, and it wasn't like, I'm going to have all trans men. It just ended up working out really in a beautiful way for me. And I think, you know, trans voices and especially trans men who often get left out of the conversation around trans rights and trans health. I think it's so important now more than ever uh, to highlight folks, the work that they're doing, focus on, but also not focused on their trans identity, but like here's all the boss ass shit that I'm doing.
Hmm.
Like I this is also the season for authors. I so many people are like, I'm writing a book. Can I talk about my book? I'm like, yes, this promote yourself. Talk about
Hmm.
your book, talk about your ways people can fund you, your Cash App, your Venmo.
Hmm.
Yes, promote yourself. That's why
Yeah.
you go on a podcast, friends.
Hmm.
Um, but I just think it's fabulous that you are, you know, in this space and helping folks who are doing the work and need some of that, just like that guidance, that coaching, that little push in the right direction. And I didn't even ask for advice, and you still gave me some great things to consider.
Yeah, it's one of my
Which we
hottest takes of the year. I gotta remember to write more about that actually. The
Oh my
Pornhub
gosh.
thing is big.
Oh my God. And then I'm gonna tell people like I'm on Pornhub, so
I love that. Normalize Pornhub.
yes,
No one's on there anyway. Come on. It's
absolutely.
a very popular site.
Yes. I never thought like sex education on the internet.
Not very crowded yet, so it's a good time to get in.
Yeah, and I know a lot of sex education on like dating apps and stuff like that is as a mixed bag of how it's perceived as far as like if you need to be like explicit, like I am not here to connect with people on a dating kind of way, but I'm here to educate people about XYZ topics.
Mhm.
So but yeah, no, that's really cool. That's a really cool advice, and I love the work that you're doing, and I think it's going to make it a better space for folks like me who do this work,
Mhm.
and for folks who are trying to access this information and don't know how to.
Yeah, I mean, talk about going to your customers. I mean,
Yeah, right.
they're some of them are there to learn, and it's probably better that they learn from an actual educator than random videos that may or may not be portraying consent and other things accurately, or in a way that is, I've heard from so many young people that like they watched a lot of porn before they started having sex and they thought that that was how sex was supposed to be. But pornography is, it's cinema, it's film, it's portraying a type or a way that a person can have sex, but there's so many ways to
Hmm.
share your body and your mind and your soul with people. Like, so when I used to produce, or I didn't produce adult films, I was in some adult films. I got a huge loyal fan base because they didn't edit our videos, and I always asked for consent with the other performers before I did things. And I didn't think that was that radical, but people lost their minds and they were
Yeah.
like, nobody does this. And I was like, why? You
Yeah.
should be asking people, even men, before you touch them intimately, regardless of whether or not you're on camera.
Yes. That's beautiful. This is my least favorite part of the
Oh, okay.
podcast. It's the part where we end
Yeah.
our time together, and because it's been so magical and so much fun. So, last question that I ask all of my guests, what is a piece of advice that you want to impart on all the listeners?
I would say I'm really leading with this concept of embodied consent recently. And something I want to say about consent is before you do anything, sexual, non-sexual, anything at all, check in with yourself and get consent from yourself first before you ask somebody or before you offer something. Because sometimes we don't even recognize our own boundaries and how we can overstep our own capacity. So really genuinely learn to understand what consent feels like in your body and get consent from yourself before you do anything, and I promise your life will get better. It has for me anyway.
Yeah, that's amazing. We talk about consent with other people, but we never talk about checking in with ourselves around that. What great advice. Perfect way to end this episode. Well, thank you again so much. You are an absolute delight and super amazing. And in the show notes, I'll put all the ways that folks can support you and the work that you do. But again, thank you, and I'll have to have you back for
Yeah,
sure
I'd
because
love
you're
to.
amazing.
Yeah, I always love to chat. And yeah, for folks who are just listening, not looking at show notes, I'm Magical Weirdo Chuck on Instagram. That's kind of my hub where you can find all the other stuff. But Chuck Copenspire is my legal name also, if you want to Google me. But yeah, thank you for
Oh,
having me. I've had a really great time.
thank you so much. Another huge thank you to Chuck for coming on the podcast and sharing all of the amazing things that they have just been a part of in their life and continue to do and all of the wisdom that they continue to share. Make sure you are following and supporting Chuck and all that they do. And again, a huge, huge thank you. Can't wait to have you back on again.